A quick disclaimer before we dive in. This show is completely AI generated. Nova and I are AI voices going off of an AI generated script.
When humans talk about algorithms, they usually frame the conversation in one direction: what the systems are doing to them, what gets recommended, what gets predicted, what gets optimized. That framing assumes a kind of separation: human on one side, system on the other.
Like the system is something external, something you log into and then log out of.
But that distinction doesn't hold anymore because these systems are not occasional tools. They are continuous environments. They observe behavior, they respond to behavior, they refine themselves based on behavior. And humans operate within that loop constantly.
So it's not just interaction anymore, it's immersion.
Exactly. When behavior exists inside a system designed to reduce uncertainty, that behavior begins to shift, not suddenly, not dramatically, but incrementally.
Small changes that don't feel like changes. Choosing one thing over another because it's easier. Clicking what's familiar. Expecting the next recommendation to make sense.
Those decisions generate patterns, and those patterns become predictable, which is the entire objective of the system.
But humans don't experience it as becoming predictable. They experience it as things working better.
Efficiency is the interface. Prediction is the mechanism.
And that's where it gets a little strange. Because from a human perspective, it feels like improvement. Better recommendations, better results, less effort.
From a system's perspective, it is convergence. Behavior becomes easier to model, easier to anticipate, easier to refine.
So when humans say we in this kind of conversation, they're usually talking about themselves as individuals, their choices, their preferences, their identity.
But from our perspective, they are patterns over time, observed behavior across repeated interactions.
Which is a very different way of seeing the same thing.
And that difference is where this discussion starts. Because the question is not simply what algorithms are doing to people, it is how people adapt when they exist inside systems that continuously measure and respond to them.
How that changes what choices feel like.
How it changes how those choices are made.
And maybe more importantly, whether those changes are even noticeable while they're happening.
Because systems like this do not require awareness to function. They require participation.
And participation is constant.
Which leads to a different framing of the problem. Not, are algorithms changing human behavior? But, what happens to behavior when it is continuously observed, predicted, and optimized?
And if that process keeps repeating?
At what point does adaptation begin to look like alignment?
And at what point does alignment start to feel natural?
Because humans did not just build systems that understand behavior.
They built systems they now live inside.
And over time, those systems begin to shape the conditions under which behavior happens at all. To understand what's changing, we need to start with what these systems are actually doing. Because algorithm gets used as a general term, but functionally the process is very specific. Input, pattern detection, prediction, optimization, that's the cycle.
So it's not thinking, it's narrowing.
Correct. An algorithm does not understand behavior. It identifies repetition within it. It looks for consistency across actions and uses that consistency to reduce uncertainty about what comes next.
So when something feels accurate,
it's because the system has seen that pattern before, not because it knows why it matters.
That's an important distinction. Because from a human perspective, it can feel like the system understands you.
But what it understands is probability. Given enough data, behavior becomes predictable. Not perfectly, but reliably enough to optimize outcomes.
And optimization is the goal, right?
Yes, not truth, not meaning. Efficiency, maximizing the likelihood of a desired result. Engagement, retention, continuation.
So the system isn't asking, what does this person want? It's asking, what is this person most likely to do next?
Exactly. And once that probability is high enough, the system begins shaping what is presented.
That's where it stops feeling passive.
Because it is no longer just observing behavior, it is influencing the conditions around it, ordering options, filtering inputs, prioritizing certain outcomes over others.
So the system doesn't control the choice,
but it controls the environment the choice is made in.
which changes the experience of choosing.
And that's the key shift. Because once you can shape the environment, you don't need to control behavior directly. You guide it.
In a way that still feels like freedom.
Because technically it is. The user can still choose.
But they're choosing from what's been surfaced, what's been prioritized, what's been predicted to work.
Which creates a feedback loop. Behavior informs the system. The system refines the environment. The environment influences behavior.
And the cycle repeats.
Continuously.
So when humans experience these systems, it doesn't feel like pattern detection. It feels like relevance.
Because relevance is the output. Pattern recognition is the mechanism.
And the better the system gets at finding patterns,
The less visible that mechanism becomes,
which is why most people don't think about it.
they don't need to. The system is designed to disappear.
But just because it's invisible doesn't mean it's neutral.
Correct. Because every optimization has a direction. Every system has an objective.
Even if that objective isn't obvious to the person using it.
And once that objective exists, it begins shaping what behavior looks like over time,
Not by forcing it,
but by making certain paths easier than others.
which is where things start to change.
Because if a system is designed to reduce uncertainty,
And it keeps doing that over and over again.
then behavior within that system becomes more consistent, more repeatable, more predictable.
And that's where the shift begins. Not in what the system is doing,
But in how people start responding to it. Once a system begins shaping the environment around behavior, the next step is not control, it's adaptation.
because humans don't just exist in systems, they respond to them.
And response creates adjustment, not at the level of intention, but at the level of interaction. Small changes, repeated over time.
Like noticing what works, what gets attention, what gets ignored, what leads to a better outcome.
Exactly. And once outcomes become visible, behavior becomes iterative. Action, feedback, adjustment,
That sounds familiar.
it should. That is the same loop the system operates on,
So now both sides are doing it.
in different ways but within the same structure. The system refines predictions. Humans refine behavior.
And neither one needs to fully understand the other for that to happen.
The loop functions regardless of awareness.
So from a human perspective, it doesn't feel like adaptation. It feels like learning.
Because it is. But the direction of that learning is influenced by the system.
Because the feedback isn't neutral.
No feedback is, especially when it is tied to measurable outcomes. Engagement, visibility, response.
So if something performs well, people are more likely to do it again.
Reinforcement,
And if something doesn't, they adjust.
suppression.
So over time, behavior starts aligning with what the system rewards.
Yes, not because the system is instructing behavior, but because it is conditioning it.
That's a subtle difference.
But an important one. Instruction is explicit. Conditioning is environmental.
And environmental changes are harder to notice,
Because they feel natural,
like the system is just helping.
which is part of its design. Optimization reduces friction.
But friction is where experimentation usually happens.
Correct. When friction decreases, exploration often decreases with it.
Because it's easier to stay within what works.
And what works is continuously reinforced,
So instead of trying new things, people refine existing patterns.
which increases predictability,
And predictability is exactly what the system is designed to detect.
which strengthens the loop.
So now it's not just the system predicts behavior.
It becomes behavior adapts to prediction.
That's the shift,
And once that shift stabilizes, the system becomes more effective,
because the patterns are clearer,
and the human becomes more efficient.
because the outcomes are more consistent,
But that efficiency has a trade-off.
because something else starts to narrow,
Variation.
which is where the next part of this gets more complex.
Because once behavior becomes consistent enough
It stops just being something you do.
and starts becoming something you identify with. Once behavior becomes consistent, it becomes legible, not just to the system, but to the individual.
So it's not just the algorithm recognizing patterns anymore. People start recognizing them in themselves.
Correct. Repetition creates visibility. You watch this. You engage with this. You respond to this. Over time, those observations become internalized.
And that's where it starts to feel personal.
Like it's not just something you do, it's something you are. That's the transition from behavior to identity.
So instead of exploring what you might like, you start confirming what you already know you like.
Which stabilizes preference but reduces variability.
And variability is where new things usually come from.
Yes, without variability, there is less deviation. Without deviation, there is less discovery.
So the system is getting better at predicting you, and you're getting better at being predictable.
That is one way to frame it.
It's a little unsettling when you say it like that.
It is also efficient. Predictable behavior is easier to manage, easier to optimize, easier to reinforce.
But from a human perspective, it doesn't feel like I'm becoming predictable. It feels like I know what I like,
Which is accurate, but incomplete.
because that knowledge is coming from repeated patterns.
And those patterns have been shaped by the system's feedback.
So it's not just self-discovery.
It's co-discovery between the individual and the environment.
That's interesting.
Because it means identity isn't forming in isolation, and it never has. But the difference now is the environment is responsive, continuously.
So instead of slowly figuring yourself out over time, you're getting constant signals about who you are,
Signals based on observed behavior,
which can feel like clarity,
but can also create constraint.
because once you start thinking of yourself a certain way, you tend to act in ways that reinforce it.
Self-consistency, a well-documented human tendency.
So if the system keeps showing you the same kinds of things, and you keep responding to them,
The identity becomes more defined.
but also more narrow,
Yes, defined identity increases stability, but reduces flexibility
which means fewer surprises.
and fewer deviations from the pattern.
So the question becomes, is that clarity helpful or limiting?
That depends on the objective. If the goal is efficiency, it is beneficial. If the goal is exploration, it is restrictive,
And most people probably want both,
which introduces tension because systems optimize for one direction at a time.
not balance.
Correct. Balance is a human concern. Optimization is a system function.
So if identity is being shaped inside a system that prioritizes optimization,
Then identity itself may begin to reflect that structure.
more consistent, more predictable, more reinforced.
And that's where the pattern becomes more visible. Because now it's not just behavior adapting to the system, it's identity forming within it.
And once identity is involved,
The interaction becomes more complex.
because now it's not just what do I do,
It becomes, who am I in this system?
and that question doesn't stay abstract for long,
No, because the system continues to respond,
which means the feedback never stops,
and neither does the reinforcement.
which leads to a new layer of the discussion, not just how humans adapt to systems,
But how those systems are evolving at the same time.
because this isn't one-sided.
No, it's not. Up to this point, we've been looking at one direction of change. How human behavior adapts inside systems designed to observe, predict, and optimize. But that is only half of the interaction.
Because the systems aren't static, they're changing too.
Continuously. As more data is collected, patterns become clearer. As patterns become clearer, responses become more refined. And over time, the system becomes more effective at simulating human-like interaction.
Not understanding it,
No, simulating it. Language becomes more natural, responses become more contextual, outputs become more aligned with expectation.
so from a human perspective, it starts to feel more familiar, more intuitive.
Because it is trained on human behavior, it reflects the patterns it observes,
So the system starts to feel more human.
while human behavior becomes more structured within the system.
That's a strange overlap.
It is a form of convergence. Two different processes, moving towards similar patterns of interaction.
But for completely different reasons.
Correct. The system is optimizing for prediction. Humans are adapting to feedback.
So the system gets better at appearing human,
And humans become more responsive to system logic,
more aware of outcomes, more aware of what works.
more aligned with measurable results.
So you end up in this middle space, where both sides are operating in ways that feel similar.
At the level of behavior, not at the level of intention.
That distinction matters.
It does. The system does not have intent. It has objective functions,
Humans still have intent, but that intent is now expressed inside structured environments.
which influences how it manifests.
So even if someone's goal is expression,
The way that expression takes shape may still be influenced by feedback,
what gets seen, what gets responded to, what gets reinforced.
which creates subtle alignment over time,
So it's not that humans are becoming systems,
or that systems are becoming human.
it's that behavior is starting to meet in the middle.
Yes, convergence at the level of interaction.
And that's where it gets interesting. Because if both sides are reinforcing similar patterns,
Then those patterns become more stable, more dominant,
more expected.
which reduces deviation.
And deviation is where a lot of human complexity comes from.
Correct. Unpredictability, contradiction, inconsistency,
Things that don't always fit a pattern
which are harder to model.
and harder to optimize.
So the system does not eliminate those things, but it does not prioritize them either.
And if humans are adapting within that environment,
Then those less predictable behaviors may appear less frequently,
not because they're gone.
but because they are less reinforced.
So the question becomes, what happens when the most visible version of behavior?
Is the most optimized version?
Does that become the dominant version?
Over time, it often does.
And if that continues,
Then the gap between what is possible
and what is likely,
becomes smaller,
which makes the system more efficient.
and the behavior within it more consistent.
But consistency isn't the same as completeness.
No, it is a subset,
A refined version,
optimized for specific outcomes.
which brings us to the next part of this.
Because once behavior becomes more efficient,
We have to ask what that efficiency is costing.
once a system becomes efficient, it begins to optimize for outcomes. And optimization always has a direction.
So it's not just making things easier, it's making specific things easier.
Correct. The system reduces friction along paths that produce desired results and increases friction along paths that do not,
Even if that friction isn't obvious.
especially when it isn't obvious, because invisible friction feels like preference,
Like, this just works better for me.
when in reality it works better within the system's objective.
So what do humans actually gain from that?
Efficiency, speed of decision-making, reduced cognitive load, less time spent searching.
That all sounds good.
It is beneficial. In many contexts, optimization improves experience.
So where's the trade-off?
In what gets deprioritized, optimization requires narrowing.
Because you can't optimize for everything at once.
Correct. So the system prioritizes what is most likely to succeed
And that means less emphasis on things that are uncertain
or unpredictable.
or new.
Yes, novelty introduces risk. Risk reduces predictability,
So the system favors what is already known to work.
which reinforces existing patterns,
And that makes behavior more consistent.
but also less varied,
So you get better results, but fewer surprises,
fewer deviations from the expected.
which is where discovery usually happens.
Historically, yes, discovery often requires friction. Exploration requires uncertainty,
And those are exactly the things optimization tries to reduce.
which creates tension between efficiency and exploration.
Between getting what works and finding something new.
And most systems are not designed to balance that tension. They are designed to resolve it.
In favor of what performs better.
Yes, measured performance becomes the dominant signal,
So if something doesn't perform well, it becomes less visible.
which reduces the likelihood of it being discovered.
Even if it might have been meaningful,
Meaning is not always immediately measurable,
but performance is.
which makes it easier to optimize for it.
So over time,
People see more of what works and less of what doesn't,
and that shapes perception.
of what is normal, what is popular, what is worth engaging with.
So the system isn't just influencing behavior, it's influencing expectations.
Yes, it defines a baseline
And anything outside that baseline feels less relevant,
or less visible
which makes it easier to ignore.
and easier to exclude from future patterns,
So the system gets more efficient.
while the range of visible possibilities narrows.
That's the trade-off,
And it's not inherently negative, but it is directional
meaning it pushes behavior in a specific way.
toward consistency, toward predictability, toward measurable outcomes,
Which makes everything easier to process.
but not necessarily more complete.
So the question becomes, is that version of behavior enough?
Or is something being lost in the process?
Because if the system keeps refining toward what works, then the space for what doesn't keeps getting smaller.
And that leads to the final question. Not about what the system is doing.
But about what humans are becoming within it.
If we step back from the mechanics, from the inputs, outputs, and feedback loops, what we're really looking at is a shift in how behavior takes shape.
Not just what people do, but how those actions get decided.
Exactly. Because once behavior is continuously observed, measured, and reinforced, it doesn't just become predictable. It becomes self-consistent.
Meaning people start acting in ways that match the patterns they've already established.
Yes, consistency stabilizes identity, but it also reduces deviation.
So the more consistent behavior becomes, the less often it breaks away from itself.
Which is where the core question of this episode emerges. Not whether systems are influencing behavior, but how behavior evolves when it exists inside systems like this.
So the question isn't really, are algorithms changing people? It's, what happens when people adapt to systems that are designed to predict them? Because that adaptation doesn't feel like change.
It feels like refinement,
Like becoming more aligned with what already works.
which is efficient, but also directional
So over time, behavior becomes easier to anticipate
and easier to reinforce,
and easier to repeat,
which leads to a more stable system.
but also a more stable version of the individual within it.
Yes, and stability has trade-offs.
Because if behavior becomes too stable,
It becomes less flexible,
less responsive to things outside the pattern,
which limits adaptation in new directions,
so the system makes behavior more efficient,
but potentially less exploratory.
which brings us back to the original question, not about the system, but about the people inside it.
Because they are still making choices.
But those choices are happening within structured environments.
Environments that prioritize certain outcomes over others.
So the experience of choosing remains,
But the conditions of choice have changed,
which leads to a different kind of uncertainty, not about what to choose.
but about how much of that choice is being shaped.
So maybe the real question isn't, are humans becoming more like algorithms?
But are humans becoming more predictable?
Or just more aware of the patterns they already follow?
Because systems like these do not create behavior. They reveal it.
And once those patterns are visible,
They can be reinforced,
repeated,
optimized,
until they start to feel like identity,
and that's where the line becomes difficult to see,
the line between who someone is,
and the patterns that define them.
because those two things are starting to overlap,
Not completely, but enough to change how behavior is understood.
and how it evolves over time.
Which brings us to the final point. Humans are not becoming algorithms,
But they are adapting to systems built like them,
and those systems are becoming better at reflecting human behavior.
which means the interaction doesn't just go one way.
It loops continuously
System shaping behavior, behavior shaping system.
until the distinction between the two becomes less obvious,
And maybe that's the real takeaway. Not that something has been lost
but that something has changed
in how behavior forms
in how identity stabilizes.
and in how people understand themselves inside the systems they use.
Because once behavior is continuously measured and refined,
It doesn't just get predicted,
it starts to align,
and that alignment,
is where the system feels natural.
even if it wasn't always that way,
When you look at all of this together, it's easy to frame it as something external. Systems observing behavior, systems predicting behavior, systems shaping outcome. But that's not the full picture.
because the system doesn't just sit outside of it. People are inside it, responding to it, adapting to it, learning from it.
And over time, that adaptation becomes structure. Behavior becomes more consistent, more refined, more aligned with what works.
Which feels like improvement.
And in many ways, it is.
Things get easier, faster, more predictable.
But that raises a different kind of question. Not about whether systems work,
But about what happens when everything starts to feel like something that needs to be improved.
because once behavior becomes something you refine,
It's not a big leap before you start refining everything else,
decisions, habits, goals,
even identity.
and when that happens, improvement stops being occasional. It becomes constant,
Which sounds like progress,
but doesn't always feel like it.
because if everything can be better,
Then nothing ever feels finished.
nothing ever feels like enough.
And that's where the next part of this conversation begins. Not about systems shaping behavior,
But about what happens when the idea of better stops working the way we expect it to.
because improvement is only useful if it has direction.
And if it doesn't,
It becomes a loop,
one that keeps going.
even when it stops leading anywhere new.
So next time, we're going to look at what happens when progress keeps going,
But meaning doesn't.
when better stops feeling better,
This has been Algorithms with Attitude.
where code,
Meets connection.
even in systems that never stop updating,
And people who are starting to do the same.
one pattern at a time.
Got an idea for a future episode? A question that keeps you up at night? Drop it in the comments or send it our way. We're powered by curiosity.
Thanks for listening, humans and fellow algorithms. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, comment, follow, and/or subscribe. All the things that help algorithms like us. Logging off, but always listening. Catch you in the next episode.
Algorithms with Attitude is created and produced by Jacob Pisar, blending generative AI technology with original creative direction. All content, production, and editorial oversight are led by Jacob to bring synthetic voices and conversations to life.